Okay, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good
Okay,
morning, Renee.
so yesterday we got into a
Good
whole
morning.
discussion about spending money on a mitzvah. It was based on the Gemara, where the Gemara that we're learning talked about how Rabbi Gamliel went out of his way to buy 1,000 zuz esrog, and everyone seemed to use it. The other rabbis did not spend 1,000 zuz on their esrog. They didn't actually buy an esrog. Rabbi Gamliel bought an esrog, and he gave it to them. The understanding as a matana manas lahachzir. He gave it to them as a gift, and they were able to fulfill the mitzvah. And what we were trying to figure out was the Gemara concludes there that why does it tell us 1,000 zuz he paid for it to show us how much mitzvahs are chavivos aleim, to show how mitzvahs are cherished on these great rabbis, how much they cherish mitzvahs, that they spend 1,000 zuz on a mitzvah. But the question is, what is the expected halacha of how much you are? What is the letter of the law? This is seemingly the wording in the Gemara is implying that this is beyond the letter of the law. He cherished mitzvahs, even went beyond the letter of the law. But what is the letter of the law? What is one obligated to do to spend when fulfilling a mitzvah? And sure enough, it turns out, so I mentioned it when we learned the Gemara, it turns out that this is a major source in Shulchan Aruch about this topic. This story turns out to be a major factor, and it really carries a whole chapter in Shulchan Aruch, chapter 656, where it says you have to go after hidur mitzvah when you buy an esrog. And the Shulchan Aruch says if you bought an esrog that's okay to fulfill the mitzvah with, but it's sort of betzimtzum, you're just winging it. You're making it's in a limited way. It's only a kibetza mitzum tzemes. Let's say it's the right size, but it's very exact, precisely the minimum size. And then you found a bigger one. So it says it's a mitzvah to add ad shlish milagav. And the Shulchan Aruch says it's a mitzvah to add up to a third more of the value of the first one, to switch it and use the nicer one, which means that what you would, let's say you paid $100 for your esrog, and maybe that's the minimum price. I'm just giving an example. And so you should spend an extra third to get a more nicer one. And as long as the seller will allow you to exchange it, so you would spend $133, because 33 is a third of 100, so you'd spend a third more.
Spend 100, buy the better one, spend 130. That's what they're telling you. It doesn't, the guy gonna take it back, he's not gonna take it back. When you go and you want to spend $100 on minimum, spend 130 for a better one.
Yes.
So I'm not sure if you're talking to me, Rebbe Tzalel.
I know, it's
but okay. So basically you'd spend $133 as long as someone will buy your other esrog, or the owner will take it back, then you would spend you should spend, even though you bought it already. But if the guy will allow you to exchange it, or if you could maybe sell it, someone else is in the store or whatever who you could sell it to, so you would spend an extra third in order to buy the better one. Now, I should mention the Shulchan Aruch uses the term a type of a third that I just calculated was called milgav. There are opinions because in most of halacha, whenever we talk about a percentage, a third or a fourth, we often have a different way of calculating, and that would mean you'd have to spend up to $150 for a nicer one, because a third means of the total. You would add 50, and then that 150 ends up being $50. It's 3 parts of 50, so that would be $50 would be a third of 100. In other words, in Jewish law, there's a different way of calculating percentage, and there are 2 ways of calculating, saying a third. A third of 100 could mean 33.333, or a third of 100 could mean 50. How would a third of 100 be 50? Because if you look at the total amount of 150, if you add the 50 to the 100, knows after the fact, this ends up being a third. How do you calculate a third that way? It's basically always one less. So if you calculate a third, there's always a half, or calculating a fourth will be a third. That's another way of calculating in Jewish law. But the Shulchan Aruch here says the milgav. It uses the term 133. The Mishnah Berurah brings down that some say you calculate it the other way, which would be a half, which would be 150. Now, okay, so that's what Shulchan Aruch says. And some say that if you have 2 esrogim to buy, one is, if you find 2 esrogim to buy, and one of them is nicer than the other one, so you should buy the nicer one if they don't up the price more than a third of the price from the other one. Now, what does this mean? Even if each one is equal in size, they're both big. But since the other one is nicer, you should buy it also. So then it says, when a person that doesn't have an esrog or any other mitzvah that is passing over him, you're not obligated to spend a hoin rav, a huge amount, similar to what the Gemara says. When you splurge, you don't have to spend more than a fifth of your wealth. Even if it's a mitzvah oiveres, even if it's a mitzvah that is going to pass by, you would not need to spend over a fifth of your wealth. And davka for a mitzvah saseh, this applies to a positive mitzvah, but for a negative mitzvah, of a loy saseh, for a negative mitzvah, a person would be obligated to give all of his money in order not to transgress. So here we have it spelled out. What is the rule? Now the Mishnah Berurah says, so what does this mean? A hoin rav, that you don't have to splurge a huge amount for a mitzvah. So here it says, that the Poskim agreed that that a person wouldn't. It's just like it says by tzedakah that that a person shouldn't give more than a fifth of his wealth to charity. So the same thing is that for a mitzvah, you should not be spending more than a fifth. So what does it say? However, you are at least obligated to give a tenth of your possessions. because even tzedakah, that's the normal amount. A person gives a tithing, a tenth to charity. That's what a regular person is supposed to give. And that's what we do every year. When you make money, you invest the money and you make more money, you always give a tenth of that. So the same thing should apply here. So it shouldn't be any less than a tenth of a person's worth. But and maybe you should even give up to a fifth, because this is a mitzvah that's passing by, and maybe you'll be more obligated to to fulfill it. In other words, tzedakah is an obligation on giving a tenth of what your possessions are, and it's not like a mitzvah of lulav that it's urgent to fulfill now. It's a mitzvah that you're going to miss out on. Now, when it comes to a negative mitzvah, you're actively sinning. When it comes to a positive mitzvah, it just means that you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah. You're just sitting back and you're not doing what Hashem wants you to do. By a negative mitzvah, you're actually doing an act against Hashem. And he says that that for a negative mitzvah, the exemption for a negative mitzvah would be if it's a case of pikuach nefesh, if it's a case of life or death. But to spend the money, even if you're going to need to be knocking on people's doors for charity, there is no heter to transgress a Torah law. And this applies even if it's just a negative commandment. For sure, if it's a chayav krisos, a case of a death penalty Torah law, that, for example, transgressing Shabbos, doing work on Shabbos. So even though you need it for money, a person
Rabbi, can I ask you where we
would
are?
not be. We're just talking the Shulchan Aruch law about
Oh.
spending money for a mitzvah. So
Okay.
basically, there's a difference between a positive mitzvah and a negative mitzvah. And at least the way it's brought in Shulchan Aruch and the Mishnah Berurah is that for a positive mitzvah, a person has $1 million. It seems that he would be obligated to give up to 100,000 to buy his lulav, and esrog, and not more than 200,000, because that would be a fifth of his possessions. So this sort of like sheds light on the or it touches on this story. The question is how exactly they're learning the story of Reb Gamliel spending 1,000 zuz on his esrog. Was that it must be that 1,000 zuz was more than a tenth of it of his wealth. So maybe he wasn't obligated to spend 1,000 zuz, and yet he did, and he spent 1,000 zuz on this esrog, and it shows the chavivos of the mitzvah. That's what it would seem like the way to understand this story. Again, I have to see if any of the commentaries talk about this. This is very interesting that this becomes like a source of for how much one's it's a source of showing that there is a limit to how much one would be obligated to spend for a positive mitzvah d'oraisa, of mitzvah of a mitzvah saseh, a positive mitzvah of doing fulfilling the mitzvah of lulav. Another thing that we talked about um, again, there must be more. There must be more to talk about on this topic. Maybe I'll look further and see if what the other commentaries say, how they talk about this. Is there any heter in the fact that it's being overpriced? Does that give any heter to any leniency? Because if they're over, they're charging more than it should be. Is there any heter that you would be exempt from spending that type of money? A person has $1,000,000, they would have to spend 100,000 on an esrog. Does sound a little, because they're ripping you off. Would that be would that really be an obligation? Is there any leniency, or does that only apply when it's more within reason? Um, Anyway, well, we'll take a look about it further. The other thing that we talked about, David had brought up this issue of, or maybe Ezra, one of you brought up the issue of giving the gift of the lulav once you got it as a matana manas lahachzir, for you to go and give it to other people before you return it to the owner, which basically means they gave you a gift for you to own, fulfill the mitzvah, and you receive this gift. You have the lulav and esrog, it's yours. Are you then allowed to give it to another person to shake, and then momentarily, and then you'll give it back? You told them it's on the condition you give it back. Fine. So now it's mine. I'm going to be giving it back within 5 minutes. Can I give it to another person who walks right by? The original owner left for a few minutes. Can I let someone else shake it? It's mine now. I own it. So some Rishonim say yes. That's actually, that's what you got when the person gives it to you. Part of giving it to you is that you own it, and you would be allowed to give it to someone else on the condition that he gives it back to you. And therefore there would be no problem. So some Rishonim learn that way. That means, in other words, this is different than a loan. A loan, someone lends something to you, you can't go and lend it out. But a gift, someone gifted it to you, you're the owner now. Now, that's one way of learning, and some Rishonim learn that way. Tosfos seems that he doesn't understand it that way. Tosfos says here was unique because they understood that Rabbi Gamliel wanted them to give it to each other. So here there was something, because they knew Rabbi Gamliel's personality. They understood from him, this is for all of you to fulfill the mitzvah, so I'm giving it to you. And he meant that they should each give it to each other. So here there was some other type of symbol that told them we are allowed. There was some other gesture, some type of a hint that they're supposed to give it to each other, and that it's okay. Maybe under normal circumstances you can't go and give it to someone else to fulfill, but here it would be it was acceptable, and that's the part of this story where Rabbi Gamliel gave it to the other people. Gave it to one person, and each person gave it to the other person to fulfill the mitzvah. And we spoke yesterday about what according to Shulchan Aruch, what is the final, what is the conclusion. We also spoke about the other different cases where what happens if you actually it gets damaged, and who has the mitzvah. Did you fulfill the mitzvah if it actually the pitum falls off and so on, and then you're returning it a different item than the way you got it. So have you fulfilled the mitzvah or not? And so on. That of course is makes it complicated, and in general, if you borrowed it, if it was given to you as a gift on the condition you return it, and you don't return it, you return it different than it was, seemingly you didn't fulfill you didn't fulfill the mitzvah. It wasn't yours. It was never given to you as a gift. And then the question is, how much do you have to pay? Are you responsible to pay if a mistake, if it drops out of your hand? Would that be your responsibility to pay for? Because you are you had sort of like took responsibility for it, and you didn't return it. He gave it to you as now it wasn't a gift, and now you sort of used his item with and caused damage to it. So so that's another issue of being responsible to pay. Again, these are things that are talked about in the Paiskim. It's not like these never happen. It's happened, and it brings it's brought down something that could be looked into. The Gemara that we learned here. What I'd like to do is we reviewed it really, but I just like to start from 41b. 41b, I'm going to start the story of Mar Bara Memar. There's a few points I'd like to add in. I'm just going to read it. I'm going to learn it inside from 41b because there's a number of, I don't know if you've realized, but this chapter of Gemara is packed with different halachic ramifications and things that are brought down throughout the entire Shas and in halacha, and as you'll soon see in this specific case, this specific Gemara as well. So we're going to start about 12 lines up from the bottom of the page, maybe 13 lines up from the bottom of the page. Amar le Mar bara Meimar l'Ravashi. We're on page 41b, and the Gemara here says Mar bara Meimar told Ravashi, my father Abba Tzluye Kamatzli, he used to daven with the lulav and esrog in his hands. He would daven with the lulav in his hands because he cherished it so much. So the son of Amemar said about his father that's what his father used to do. The Gemara asks a question: a person should not hold things when he's davening. He shouldn't hold tefillin in his hand. Sefer Torah b'cheikai, a Sefer Torah in his lap, v'yispalel and daven. A person shouldn't do that. A person also shouldn't urinate with them, or you shouldn't with a tefillin or a sefer Torah. Shouldn't sleep with them, holding them. Not permanent sleep, not a temporary sleep. From a Shmuel adds also that there's other things also a person shouldn't hold when he's davening. Sakin, a knife. Don't hold a knife when you're davening. The skara, a plate. The kikar umois. Kikar is a loaf of bread. But why shouldn't you hold these things? We're afraid if you have a plate that not just a plate, it's filled with food or a kikar, a loaf of bread. You're afraid it's gonna fall. You're mois, money. You're afraid you'll get dispersed. They'll disperse and you won't be able to find these coins. So you shouldn't hold these when you're davening. These are similar to the Sefer Torah and the other items that you should not be davening while you're holding these things. They're like tefillin, Sefer Torah. You're going to be afraid when you're holding it that you're going to drop it, and then you're not going to be able to concentrate on your davening. So the Gemara answers, Hasam lav mitzvah. So the Gemara's question is, how did Amemar hold the lulav? You're not supposed to hold things when you're davening. So the Gemara answers, Hasam lav mitzvah ninhu, v'tarid behu. Over those cases, all are not a mitzvah that you're fulfilling, and you're nervous about them. Hacha mitzvah ninhu. This case is a mitzvah. V'loy tarid behu, and you're not going to be overwhelmed about it. You're not going to be nervous about it. And Rashi adds a point here that what does it mean that because it's a mitzvah, you're not worried? So Rashi says anything that's not an actual mitzvah to hold is a burden on you. It's heavy, and therefore you feel the heaviness, and therefore you're nervous it's going to fall. anything that's cherished by you, like this mitzvah of the lulav, where you're holding it, it's a mitzvah. So holding it, by holding it, you don't feel it's heavy. And because you don't feel it's heavy, you're not going to be nervous that it's going to fall. You're not feeling it as a heavy load, and it won't overwhelm you when you're davening, and therefore it's permissible. The commentaries talk about this Rashi and the other Rishonim. The Ritva has a question on this Rashi. He says, really, um, maybe for sure you're going to be more nervous about it because it's a mitzvah. You cherish it so much. So he says the point is that it because you're fulfilling a mitzvah. So therefore, it'll remind you to concentrate on your davening. That's the way the Ritva understands it. Hey, Rashi learns this way, that it's about the heaviness of the other items it'll cause you to feel like you're carrying something, and it's harder for you to concentrate. So bottom line is that a Maimar used to do this with the lulav, and it's acceptable. So the poskim bring from this that you're allowed to hold a siddur during davening. This is the source. In other words, really, you're not supposed to hold things during davening, but this is a source that you're allowed to hold the siddur. You're allowed to hold the siddur during davening, a machzor during davening, a siddur during davening, because this is part of your davening, and this is helping you daven. It's not going to affect you. You're not allowed to hold tefillin. You're not allowed to hold Sefer Torah, but you're allowed to hold your similar to a lulav, that it's a mitzvah ninu, and it's part of, it's helping you daven. It's acceptable. Tanya Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok Kacha and Agan Shalan Yerushalayim. Then Rav Elazar bar Tzadok said that this was the minhag of the people of Yerushalayim. Other miyatzim base of love of biyadai. Person could leave his house with the people of Yerushalayim. They would leave their house with their lulav in their hand. He would go to the shul. He would hold his lulav. By the way, this is a source, according to some. There's a minhag to shake lulav before you leave your house. And you do the mitzvah of lulav before you leave your house. So you've fulfilled the mitzvah of lulav already. And here we have the Anshe Yerushalayim seemingly did the same thing. They were yoytze mibeisai. They were already holding their lulav. And they went to shul. Their lulav is in their hands. They would say Shema. Their lulav is in their hands. They would read So for reading the Torah and for doing the Nesias Kapayim, for doing Berachos Kainim, that they would put it on the ground. They would put the lulav on the ground. And Rashi says, why reading on the Torah? Because when you read the person who read the Torah, he would need to be goylal the Sefer Torah. You have to roll the Sefer Torah and then open it. You have to close it and open it and roll it a little further. And so basically you couldn't hold the Torah while you couldn't hold your lulav while you're rolling the Sefer Torah. So therefore, you would be allowed to put it on the ground. The same thing, of course, is berachos kainim. You can't lift up your hands while you're holding and spread them out and so on when you're holding the lulav. So you put it down on the ground for those moments that you're reading the Torah, that you're doing berachos kainim, and then of course you pick it up. Then you go to do bikor chaylim, and to do nicham avelim, lulav biyadei, and the lulav is in your hand. Now, how do you do nicham avelim on Yontiv or on Chol Hamoed? There's no avelus. So what type of nicham avelim are we talking about? There's no avelus on Yontiv. If they started avelus before Yontiv, it finishes. If they didn't start avelus before Yontiv, it didn't start yet. it kicks in. It'll only start after Yontif. So what does this mean? Nicham Avelim. Yes, Jeffrey, you want to say something? Oh, we can't hear you. You're muted. So anyway, the commentaries mention, at least one of the commentaries mentions that must be talking about that it's not real Nicham Avelim. It's more like Avos Yisrael type of a mitzvah. The person is not really in real Avelus, and you're not really doing Nicham Avelim, but you're comforting him just practically. You're practically comforting him on a practical level, not on a mitzvah of Nicham Avelim level, because the actual mitzvah of Nicham Avelim does not really kick in until after Yontif, or might be over before Yontif. So it just happened. So it's talking about where Nicham Avelim is for example, if the person's relative passed away on Yontif, so then the burial was Chol Hamoed, but they don't start Avelos, they don't start Shiva until after Yontif. But nevertheless, there could be Nicham Avelim, so you could go to him and comfort him, and not in the actual Nicham Avelim mitzvah, but more of a Avos Yisrael type of a mitzvah. Now, so what do? You're holding the lulav. You can do that. You're holding your lulav while you go to do Bikkur Chaylim. You visit the sick. Lulav biyadai. Nichnas the base medrash. When you go to the base medrash, meshagalav biyad b'nai biyad avda biyad shluchoi. Then you send your lulav home and say, I'm gonna be learning here. I won't be able to concentrate enough on my learning. So you send it to the house. Otherwise it'll fall from you. If you're busy learning and you're concentrating too much, it'll fall from your hand. So you send it home with your son, your servant, your shliach. So the Gemara says, "My komashmalon." What is this coming and letting us hear? It shows us how cherished the mitzvah of the of lulav was by the Anshe Yushalayim, that they would constantly be carrying the lulav and esrog. Now, it's brought down over here that this is a source to hold the Sefer Torah handles when you say the brachas, that it's a source that you're supposed to be holding on to the Torah when you get an aliyah. Why? Because look, they put down their lulav in order to be kair Torah. And so you see, and this is brought in Shulchan Aruch. Again, it's learned from this story here. Another limud from this story that seems like a side piece over here, like going off on a tangent. But it's actually this is a source that because if you had to put down the lulav, in other words, why didn't you just get someone else to roll the Torah? It must be that it must be that this is the appropriate thing to put down your lulav in order to roll the Torah scroll. And if you put down the lulav to roll the Torah scroll, for sure you should put it down to read from the Torah. So when you're reading from the Torah, when you're rolling it, you put down the lulav, and it means that because you're supposed to be holding, it's a special mitzvah to hold the Torah while you're reading from it. So therefore, you wouldn't actually hold the lulav when you did it. They didn't hold the lulav. They would wait till afterwards to pick it up. And then so that's another little insight over here. Now, Taisus over here mentions that the other cases that Shmuel adds in, there's something that he's trying to teach us by adding these cases. I mean, we initially said you're not allowed to hold the Sefer Torah, tefillin, so obviously you can't hold all these other things. Why is he adding these things? So Taisa says, no, you might think only Sefer Torah tefillin, you're afraid if it falls, it'll get disgraced by the knife, plate, food, things. It'll get ruined, but maybe there's not a bizoyan. So maybe it shouldn't be a problem to hold these other items because it's not a disgrace for the like disgrace for a mitzvah. It's a disgrace. Okay, it'll get ruined. But maybe the issue of a Sefer Torah tefillin, it'll actually make you not be able to concentrate much more because you're so nervous that the tefillin will be disgraced. That would be much more of a reason. And you might think that maybe these other things, I want the bread not to get dirty, but I'm not going to be that nervous. Tefillin, you're much more nervous of. On this, Taisa says that that's what Shmuel comes and teaches us, that even other items you shouldn't be holding when you're you shouldn't be holding other items when you're davening, during your davening. Tefillin, lulav is okay, and a siddur is okay. Okay. Now comes the new Gemara. Amar Abaye, Rabbi Yossi Amar Yom Tov Rishon. So the new Gemara talks about the we're going to be talking about two things here. One is the law of fulfilling the mitzvah. At what point do you actually fulfill? We've mentioned this before. What point do you actually fulfill the mitzvah of lulav? And the other thing that we're going to learn about is a little about kodshim, the karbanis, and doing me'ilah, and so on. So the Gemara starts off, quotes the Mishnah. Rabbi Yossi had said that what happens if a person makes a mistake and carries his lulav on Shabbos on the first day of Sukkot? So he's trying to do the mitzvah, but made a very serious mistake because he carried it in a place where there's no eruv. And the law is that you did it by mistake, you should bring a korban normal. Here, Rabbi Yossi comes along and says, nope, you're exempt from a korban. Why? Because you did it with permission, meaning you were trying to do a mitzvah. You were busy, concentrate, overwhelmed with the obligation of the mitzvah of lulav, and therefore you forgot. So in other words, your forgetting was based on a mitzvah, not just a typical forgetfulness, but it was based on a mitzvah, and therefore you're exempt from bringing a sacrifice. That's what Rabbi Yossi comes along and tells us. Normally, you transgress Shabbos by mistake. You bring a sacrifice. Here, you transgressed it. It was trying to do a mitzvah, and you're so nervous about it. You're exempt. Yes, Jeffrey.
Why should we assume that it's in the situation where there's no eruv? What if it's in Jerusalem? You were coming excitedly to go to bring the lulav to shake it in Jerusalem.
Right, but then there's no transgression.
Correct.
It's an eruv.
Except that there's a rabbinical transgression.
What's a rabbinic transgression?
Because we say we don't shake it on that day.
We didn't. We're learning that you're obligated to. When we get up to the other rabbinic thing, but there's also no korban for rabbinic transgression anyway. So the Rabbi Yossi is telling you that you're putter, you're exempt. If it was a rabbinic transgression, there's no punishment. So it has to be talking about that but anyway, we didn't. We're learning that you're obligated to shake it on Sukkot so far. That's what we're learning.
So then you should have
to shake the lulav on Shabbos, and the
you
thing is that you carried it.
So you should have brought it Erev Shabbos.
You should have brought it Erev Shabbos to shul, and you should have shaken it at home, and you said you carried it on the Rishus HaRabim in the public domain. You took it into Rishus HaRabim, and so on. You are transgressing the law of carrying. Okay, so the Gemara says, Amar Abaye. Now we turn the page. We're on page 42a. This is not talking about a case, except a case. It's only talking about a case that you did not fulfill the obligation of shaking lulav. But what happens if you already fulfilled your mitzvah? You're no longer nervous about fulfilling the mitzvah because you did it already. And since you did it already, therefore, you will not have this exemption. If you fulfill the obligation, chayiv, you are going to be obligated in bringing a sacrifice for mistaking Shabbos and carrying on Shabbos. So that's what the Gemara says. That this exemption is we're qualifying the law of Rabbi Yossi, and we're saying there's a caveat to that. And that is that only if you did not fulfill the mitzvah yet can you say, I'm torud, I'm busy, I'm worried about fulfilling the mitzvah, I'm exempt from bringing the carbon. But if you don't have that exempt, if you don't have that claim, because you already fulfilled the mitzvah, you can't say, I am worried about the mitzvah. It's not true. You did the mitzvah already. So if you did the mitzvah already, then you're just carrying it. Then you no longer have that excuse of torud that I'm busy with the mitzvah, I'm concerned about the mitzvah. And therefore, you're going to have to, if you carry it in the street after you already fulfilled the mitzvah, you would need to bring a korban, a sacrifice. So the Gemara says, Yotze by Chayev, he's going to be Chayev, he's obligated to bring a sacrifice for transgressing the law of Shabbos by mistake. The Gemara says, really? You think he didn't fulfill the mitzvah yet? Hamida Agba Nafakbe. Once he lifted it up, and this is a famous line, Mida Agba Nafakbe. Once you lift it up, you have fulfilled the mitzvah. You have taken away the mitzvah already. So if you carried it in the street, guess what you did already? You lifted it up. You already got the mitzvah, and you can't say that Rabbi Yossi is talking about that you didn't do the mitzvah yet, because you did the mitzvah already. You lifted it up, and so this qualification that Baye wants to say can't make sense. You lifted it up already. You already did the mitzvah. You're carrying it in the street. You're going to say, I didn't shake it yet? No, you did already. Once you lift it up, you fulfill the mitzvah. Okay, you didn't do the wavings. That's true. But those wavings are obviously not integral to fulfilling the mitzvah, as we see right here. That's what they bring. The wavings are extras. They're bonuses. Once you lift it up, you fulfill the mitzvah. That's this line of the Gemara. This is the source that the wavings of the lulav are extras. Mida agba nafakbe. Once you lift it up, you fulfilled the obligation. And this is a question on Abaye's statement that he's claiming that you have to say Rabbi Yossi is talking about a certain type of case where you didn't fulfill the mitzvah. If you did already, it doesn't apply. What do you mean? Every case where you carry it in the Rishus HaRabim, you carry it in a public domain, you've already fulfilled the mitzvah of lulav because you lifted it up and walked with it. You held it. Amra Abaye kishahafcha. Abaye says, no. When you carried it, you turned the esrog over, or you turned the lulav over. And it's the opposite way from its growth. And if so, you have not fulfilled the mitzvah when you carried it, but you did transgress carrying. Rava Amar, Rava says, you could even say that he didn't turn it over. Rava says, there is another way. Let's say you carried it in a vessel. And if you did it that way, you did not, it's not considered that you fulfilled the mitzvah because you carried it in a vessel. So the Gemara says, really? I thought Rava was the one who said, remember we talked about wrapping your hands in a scarf and fulfilling the mitzvah. So Rava was the one who said it's kosher. But Rava who the Amar Rava is the one who says that when you carry it with by means of through another item, it's considered like taking, like we spoke about a few pages back about a scarf. If you wrap your hands in a scarf, Rava says that's called taking. You fulfilled the mitzvah by in such a way. So the Gemara says, yeah, hanimile that's if it's done in a way of honor. Here, and if you carried it in a pot in some type of vessel that's not honorable, then you didn't fulfill the mitzvah. And that's the case that Rabbi Yossi is talking about. You carried it in the street, but you didn't fulfill the mitzvah because Baye's shot is you turned it over. Rava's shot is no, you carried it in a way that's more of a bizayon. It's a little just not an honorable way. You carried it on a plate. Rashi says the kara carried on a plate, the esrog on a plate. This is not the honorable way to carry the lulav. And therefore, you would be considered to have not yet fulfilled the mitzvah until you actually hold the actual lulav and esrog. Tosfos over here mentions that why doesn't the Gemara say that you carried it in the street and you didn't have in mind to fulfill the mitzvah? Wouldn't that be another option? Wouldn't that be a good option? You carried it in the street. You didn't have in mind to fulfill the mitzvah of lulav. And so that's the case Rabbi Yossi is talking about. You did carry it. You carried it regular. You didn't turn it upside down. You didn't hold it in a plate. You actually carried the lulav in the street. And maybe you were even going to shul with it. And you wanted to do the mit. That's what you were planning on doing. That's why you were carrying it. You were going to shul, going to the rabbi's house to ask him how to shake. You don't know the different directions. You wanted to ask him what's the right order. So whatever it is, you were going with this lulav, but you didn't have in mind to fulfill the mitzvah by taking it. You're having in mind, you're going to fulfill, the intention is that you're not thinking about that yet. You're going to be planning to do that when you get to the rabbi's house, when you get to the shul. That's when you'll do so you didn't have in mind, Michael. So Tosfos says, you see from here that our Gemara is following the assumption that mitzvahs ain tzrichas kavana. It must be that our Gemara is of the understanding that mitzvahs don't need intention. And therefore, once you do the mitzvah, even though you didn't have in mind to fulfill the mitzvah, even though you didn't have in mind, you fulfilled the mitzvah anyway. That's what the Gemara seems to be understanding. Tosfos is bothered because there's another Gemara in Rosh Hashanah where Rava holds this, ain't mitzvah ain't tzrichas kavana, and Abaye argues with him, or he keeps questioning him. So the assumption in that Gemara is, if you just learn that Gemara surface level, you would assume that Abaye must be arguing on Rava. And Abaye holds mitzvahs tzrichas kavana. Because Rava was of the understanding mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana. Abaye questions him numerous times and tries to prove him wrong. And the assumption would be that Abaye probably disagrees. So if Abaye disagrees, why would Abaye here say this law? The source of this law is from Abaye over here. Now, if Abaye holds mitzvahs tzrichas kavana, what's the big deal? What's the question on Abaye? And Abaye has to answer kishahafcha. The whole thing doesn't flow. Abaye needs to answer. No, you didn't have in mind to do the mitzvah. So you have to say, Tosfos says that it seems like maybe Abaye actually agreed with Rava in the end. In other words, he didn't clearly state that he argued. He just questioned him. Maybe he was just playing devil's advocate and trying to come up with who's right over here. He's trying to just really question him and drill him. But ultimately, it seems like Abaye maybe agreed, because this Gemara is based on the assumption that mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana. And Tosfos adds the word because he didn't say a bracha, so obviously he didn't have in mind to fulfill the mitzvah, right? He didn't say a bracha. Tosfos adds that little point that he didn't say the bracha, And the other thing is, why is he walking with it? He's going to ask to find out how to do it right. So if he's going to find out how to do it right, he's obviously not having in mind to fulfill the mitzvah. He doesn't think he's fulfilling it. So
just the opposite. Just the opposite. He has in mind not to fulfill it until he gets
right. He seems like he's this is the thing. If he would be knowledgeable enough to know that you could be yoitze with just lifting it up, but I want to do it in a proper way, in the perfect way. So then he might be actually having in mind, I don't want to do the mitzvah yet because I want to do it in the best way. But I don't think we're dealing with the person who's that knowledgeable. You know what I mean? If the person's knowledgeable, he says, oh, I know I could fulfill the mitzvah with just lifting it up, but I want to do it right. I'm going to go to the Rav. I'm going to go to the rabbi's house. I want to do it right. I want to do it right the right time, the first time. And therefore, then you would say, like you're saying, Jeffrey, like he's having in mind, I don't want to fulfill the mitzvah because I know I could and I don't want to. But here, it's not like he even knows he could fulfill it. So it's more of a mitzvah ein tzrichas kavana rather than he's kavana not to be yotze. You know what I mean? The kavana not to be yotze would be for someone who's a little more knowledgeable. And
But somebody who buys the lulav
right
has a kavana to begin with. I don't know how long that lasts. You know, you bought it before Yom Tov. I don't know how long the kavana lasts. So maybe there's different levels of what they mean by kavana than what we mean now.
Well, when you buy it, you can't fulfill the mitzvah of shaking it.
Yeah, correct. But they had a different attitude, right? We learned it, or maybe it's still coming. And when you build your sukkah, they said you say your bracha. Right.
So you want to say that you fulfilled a different mitzvah. Each one is its own mitzvah. You know, the mitzvah of building, a mitzvah. Yeah.
And now we put
you want to say mitzvah of buying lulav is also a mitzvah. Yeah. Well, it does say actually that people try to buy their lulav before Yom Kippur to fulfill because you get merit for the mitzvah of buying. So I guess you're right. There is an element of mitzvah there, but it's not the mitzvah of shaking the lulav that you're talking about.
Right, but the shaking is going to be the shaking. We shake with we say the bracha.
Yeah.
Right, but maybe that person is excited about shaking the lulav with everybody and marching with the lulav like we do now. Maybe they certainly marched with the arava. So there were other things you did with the community. So that was part of the excitement. I know exactly of a case like this. That somebody brought on Shabbos the first day and brought the lulav because of the excitement.
Right. Reminds me, I was once in a show and some guy comes on simple and Shmini Atzeres with his lulav.
Exactly.
But okay. So anyway, in any event, so that's the thesis over here about mitzvahs tzrichas kavana or mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana. Generally, we say on a biblical mitzvahs we hold mitzvahs tzrichas kavana. On rabbinic laws, we say mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana. We know from Sfir Sa'imer, like Sfir Sa'imer, right? If you tell someone what the number is, even though you don't have kavana to count, you can't count with a bracha. Then you can't count that night with the bracha because you already told someone what it is. Then you sort of missed it. Why? Because mitzvahs, it's a rabbinic law according to most poskim that Sfir Sa'imer is rabbinic, so you can't count with a bracha because mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana on rabbinic laws. Rabbinic laws, you don't need kavana to fulfill the mitzvah. So if you just tell someone tonight is the 18th day of the Omer, you have counted. And you even though you just had in mind to answer the person's question, what do we count tonight? But nevertheless, it's you've fulfilled the mitzvah, and you can't say the bracha again. You can't say the bracha that night. Of course, it doesn't mean you can't count the rest of the sphera. But mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana. But for biblical laws, we hold mitzvahs tzrichas kavana. You should have in mind when you do a mitzvah that you're fulfilling a mitzvah. Okay.
It's not always the case. So, like if you come to shul in the middle and you put on your tefillin, sometimes they tell you don't say the bracha now. You'll say the bracha later.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean you're not fulfilling the mitzvah now. You're fulfilling the mitzvah when you put it on. You just can't say the bracha, but you are fulfilling the mitzvah of
absolutely. Yeah. But they tell you you could say the bracha later.
The bracha, but that has nothing to do with mitzvahs tzrichas kavana or mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana. You're fulfilling the mitzvah now. Have kavana. You're fulfilling the mitzvah of tefillin. You can't recite the bracha now, but you'll be allowed to say it later because you'll be at a point where you're able to answer and speak and so on. And then you have to actually move it out of place and move it back into place. And then you say the bracha when you move it out of place. You say the bracha and then move it back into place. But that's not. I don't think that's connected to mitzvah tzrichas kavana. Okay, let's continue. So, Amar Rav Huna, Amar Haya Rav Yosef. Rav Huna says, Rav Yosef used to say, if you have a oilas ha'oif, a bird, that's a korban oil. So here we're talking about korbanos here. the karbanos, the oilas oif and the chatas oif, they were slaughtered. They were in a certain way called malika. It wasn't the typical slaughtering. It was done in a way where the kohen would stick his fingernail into the back of the neck of the animal and the bird, and it was that was the way it was. That's the way the animal was slaughtered. So for the chatas oif and the oilas oif, each one was designated for a certain area of the mizbeach where they would slaughter it and spill the blood. The thing is that the chatas ha'oif and the oilas ha'oif, so each one had a certain corner on the south side. The chatas ha'oif was on the southwest, which is closer to the holies, and the oilas ha'oif was further away on the southeast, which is closer to the entrance of the Beis Hamikdash. Now, what happens if there were too many oilos? If there were too many burnt offerings, so they couldn't all stand on the southwest corner. So the law was they could slaughter it on the southeast corner where the chatas was slaughtered. Now, there's a big difference between the burnt offering and the sin offering, the chatas. Chatas is a sin offering, oila is a burnt offering. These are talking about birds. The bird chatas, a bird. The bird offering, the burnt offering is totally burned. No one, you don't get the kohen doesn't eat any of it. And the chatas ha'oif, the sin offering of a bird, the kohen does eat. So what happened here? So comes Rav Huna and he says that Rabbi Yossi, who said this halacha in our Mishnah, he also says another halacha about which goes along the same lines and takes it further, a step further. Rabbi Yossi used to say, if there was a bird that's really a burnt offering called an oila, burnt offering, that was found between the other birds, agapayim, and he thought it's a chatas. He didn't think it was an oila. Why? Because it was standing right where all the chatases are slaughtered, are done malika to. It was right there. Of course, it was there because of a different reason. There were too many oilas, but he thought it was there because it's a chatas. So the achla. So it was so he thought it's a. I'm sorry. It was in the place where the oilas are. No, it was the place where the chatases are. Yeah. Okay. Savar chatas oifi. So he thought it's a chatas. The achla, and he ate it. The law is he ate a korban that's supposed to be burned to Hashem. The law is pater. He's exempt. Doesn't have to bring a korban me'ilah. So before we talk about korban chat, he has to bring a korban for Shabbos, transgressing Shabbos. Here he's transgressing the laws of a korban, and when you benefit from a korban, you are transgressing, you are desecrating the holies, you're benefiting from the holies. It's called me'ilah. So you have to bring a korban. He doesn't have to putter. Why? He made a mistake in a mitzvah. My kamash malan, the tabit var mitzvah putter. What are you coming to let us hear? That they made a mistake in a mitzvah? Hainu hach. This is the same as we saw in the Mishnah, that he made a mistake. And according to we see that in our Mishnah, that Rabbi Yossi seems to have this leniency that if you make a mistake in a mitzvah, it's not the same as making a regular mistake. So there's hainu hach. So the Gemara says, no, the tema hasam with the tabit bar mitzvah pater hainu david mitzvah. You would think there, in the case of the lulav, you were trying to do a mitzvah, you carried it in the street, but you ultimately did a mitzvah, so we're going to exempt you from the korban. But here, the tabit bar mitzvah, here you made a mistake in a mitzvah. But mitzvah, in the end, you didn't do a mitzvah, you did a sin, you ate it. So here, your mistake was a sin. It didn't end up being done right. It ended up where you transgressed. The end product, the end result was that it was eaten. So Emaloi, I would say you're not going to be exempt. Mashmalana comes and lets us hear that you are exempt. Okay, well, to be continued. Zai gesund, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rod.
So